In line with the Pioneer video I recently released, I will also be going over the modern ban list in anticipation of a hopefully exciting announcement come the 31st. Alright, so I have three proposed bans here. Breach, I don't think I really need to say anything about that. Obviously something from that deck is going to get banned. The other culprit is Mox Opal. However, Mox Opal is propping up like 10 healthy tier 2 decks, so it would be a bit of a tragedy to see it go. I've also got a Johnny, and I have a little bit more nuanced reasons for why I put a Johnny on the list. Now, Energy, despite being not great into Underworld Breach, although the recent win rate suggests it's more along the lines of 50-50, is that Energy's still broken. It's easy to forget that when Breach is just destroying the format, but Energy is broken, and part of the reason is a Johnny. All the traditional counterplay against Lord of the Ground aggro decks, such as Sweepers, just a Johnny kind of negates, right? Because you play a Johnny and, well, you get your little Planeswalker, you sweep, and then you just refill the board because you've got a Johnny and it's dealing a whole bunch of damage to you. It's very hard to get rid of everything the deck plays. That's number one. The other way to counter Lord of the Ground aggro is to build a board presence, right? So, hey, you've got some creatures, I've got some creatures to block. A Johnny makes combat impossible. Any cat dies, you just lose the game on the spot. Not to mention that it, with Goblin Bombardment, is essentially a 2-card combo. You play those 2 cards, you win 90% of those games, and that means that it plays like a combo deck as well. It's not like, oh, maybe I can survive at 1 life, I can put some extra life in here. It's like, no, you just straight up die as early as like turn 3. Very unhealthy play patterns. Get this out of here. A Kozilek's Command, may not seem like it, but it has very similar reasons as a Johnny for me wanting to make it go. Is that it removes traditional counterplay to big mana decks. Well, you can try to aggro them, get some creatures on board to hit him. This is a very cheap way to actually get rid of that creature. If you try to, say, destroy some of their lands, like, that's usually what it was against Tron, is, play Blood Moon, you play Cleansing Wildfire, whatever, you try to destroy their lands, get them off some of the big mana. Kozilek's Command says, I make a whole bunch of spawns, I don't care they just destroy 3 of my lands, I'm still going to cast my Eldrazi. That is very unhealthy. Do not like those play patterns. So for those reasons, I say get it out of here. Alright, unbans. Well, what happened to the previous unban announcement? I do believe they are doing this as somewhat of an experiment, and they're seeing how well it went, and if it went well, then they're going to do more. I am going to argue that it actually went amazing. If you just ignore Breach, because Breach will get banned, Opal is perfect, not only perfectly fine for the meta, actively healthy for the meta, right? All of a sudden these Asmo, Hammer Time, Scales decks, they're playable on the fringes, and they just weren't before, so that's great. The metagame diversity has significantly been improved by Mox Opal, absent Breach. Splinter Twin has done nothing, but that means it was a good unban, right? That means it didn't deserve to stay on the ban list, and those Splinter Twin fans who really enjoy the deck can play it, and the gameplay against the deck is very much tolerable now that we have, I think Besage in particular makes the play patterns a whole lot more, as I said, tolerable. We got a lot more instant speed interaction, yes, Solitude as well. And now that we have the counterplay, those kinds of decks existing are actually kind of great. Green Sun Zenith, people were really afraid that it was going to make Titan broken. Titan's not even playing the main deck anymore, which I find very odd, but I guess, I'm not that intimate with the deck. And that means absent that, it's just serving for toolbox decks, right? We've seen some cool Yawgmoth-less Yawgmoth decks, even some of the Yawgmoth decks. I think Green Sun Zenith makes the gameplay a little bit more interesting even, right? Because you can't just tutor out your combo, because, Yawgmoth's black. They basically are relegated to tutoring out fair cards or tutoring out your Young Wolves if you are trying to combo, but you can't tutor out the main combo piece, which is the... And even ignoring Yawgmoth, people can play their Knight of the Reliquaries and whatnot. I know those aren't necessarily playable decks, but for the sake of pet cards being in the format and for the sake of people being drawn to certain archetypes and decks, I certainly say the possibilities and the diversities have been significantly improved by this card. Faithless Looting was the last card they unbanned. And this was the card I was actually most scared of, because, just turn 1 Faithless Looting, turn 2 Persist seems horrible, to say the least. But all it's really done is Hollow One is a playable deck. It's not oppressive. Phoenix is a deck you can play, even if it's not necessarily good. So yeah, pure positive for the format. So I think what the lesson they should learn here is that we should do a lot more unbans, because I do believe these were among a few of these were among the riskier unbans they could have taken compared to what I'm suggesting in the following slides here. So let's take a look. I've got the no-brainers. Ponder. Is anyone scared of Ponder? The best argument I've heard is that it takes too much time in tournaments, but that's not even really that true. I don't know. It takes somewhat a moderate amount of time, but it's just a 4 of, and it doesn't take too much. Very, very innocuous. I think it would help. It's not really going to support many of the combo decks necessarily. It would support like the Delver, the Murktide, the Blue Black Frog, which would have been a negative a few months ago, but the deck's kind of fallen off. So yeah, just feed a little bit of life into it. Jite, I've heard some people say that it's just going to oppress creature decks and it'll just go straight into energy. I don't believe either of those are the case. I think the only thing it'll do is support Stoneforge decks, which I'm struggling to even think of an argument for why that would be a bad thing, because Stoneforge decks are usually indicative of a somewhat healthy gameplay. Vault of Whispers, I did rank each of the artifact lands individually because I think grouping them as a collective is very stupid. Just as all things, you can apply that little lesson to real life as well. So, taking a look at the individuality of each of the card Vault of Whispers, there are no black artifact decks. Need I say more? So the probably fine cards, the only reason Punishing Fire is here and not on the no-brainers is because Eldrazi can easily slot in Punishing Fire, but if they're losing Kozilek's command, then I think it would just be an overall nerf to the deck. A net nerf to the deck, and in terms of what it can do for, say, fair Maverick land style decks, I think that significantly outweighs the negatives, the slight negatives of Eldrazi getting an even better late game inevitability. Birthing Pod, I would have put this in a no-brainer, but Oculus is a card now, so you just sack any 2-drop into Oculus if you're not trying to immediately combo, and I think that's actually quite scary. But heck, let's unban it. I don't think that would be so much a power issue as it would be a gameplay issue. But yeah, especially with these toolbox kind of cards, it's very difficult to even predict what the deck list would look like. So I estimate it's probably like 83% fine for the format, which, hey, if they're willing to unban Opal and whatnot, you might as well take the risk with that one, right? Tree of Tales, Great Furnace, same reason as the Black Artifact land, except for Hardened Scales exists as like a tier 3 deck, and some of the there's some like red Gleeful Demolition style decks. I don't know, I'm almost more hesitant on Great Furnace than Tree of Tales because I think a mono red aggro deck with all those second artifact deal 5 damage can actually be quite scary, but nothing like that exists at all right now, which makes me think it's fine. So yeah, let's see what happens with those two. Alright, here I have some, I recognize these cards are risky, but I also recognize that if they are fine for the format, they can actually be a huge benefit. So let's start with Uro. In terms of Simic midrange, there is none. In terms of energy and all these aggro decks, life gain, if there were more life gain in the format, that'd be a natural deterrent against those style decks. So that's certainly a plus. We also have a lot more graveyard exile and more creature exile than when the card was banned, so I think there are more checks to the card. Say we've got Soul Cauldron, which is seeing a ton of play. We've got a lot of Relic of Progenitus for Ketramos and whatnot. Ketramos is playing a lot of just, Skyclave, Solitude. There's a lot of, there's a surprising amount of Path to Exile going around. There's a lot of prismatic endings, so I think the answers are there, and it would help support archetypes and colors and strategies that are currently non-existent. And it would also be a natural deterrent against some of the more broken decks in the format, so if it's power level appropriate, I think it would be a huge plus to the format. I should also mention that Flasia is turning out to be a perfectly fine card, and they are a similar power level, even if Uro is better. Ancient Den, Blue-White Affinity is a deck, kind of. Portable Hole is a really good card. There's some mono, like there's Hammer Time, and I've seen some mono white also decks, although those a little bit less, so should be considered for the power level of this card. So it certainly goes in more powerful artifact decks than the previous colors. However, it's not blue, and blue is the only one of which I am very hesitant about. So I think this has the highest risk. I would say it's a 65% chance it's fine, but now the Opal's unbanned. You gotta be kind of cautious with these. Pre-Opal, I would have said all of them easy unbans, but hey, that's the world we're living in here. Dig Through Time. This is one of those cards that people have PTSD for and even refuse to entertain the hypothetical of whether it would be fine if unbanned in Modern. I think those people are cowards. I guess like intellectual cowards would be the exact way, because they are afraid of confronting the new idea of, is Dig Through Time fine now? Well, let's look at the formats we can look at. Dig Through Time is more than okay in Timeless. It was more than okay in Timeless back before Chromox, when it looked even more similar to Modern. Especially if you ignore the show and tell games, it was perfectly fine in those games as well, and the card pools for those games are actually quite similar to Modern. So I think we can actually learn a lot, glean a lot of insight from Timeless in regards to this card. There's only +2 cards, which I know you get a lot of selection, but keep in mind, I guess another point to add is that the decks that would be being placed in, say, Murktide and whatnot, those decks already used the graveyard a ton, right? If you're trying to cast Murktide, if you're trying to cast Oculuses, Dig Through Time is going to compete heavily with that. So there's a little bit of tug and pull there. So uh, it is high. It is risky, though. I will say that. Odds, I'd put it at 75% that it's fine, which it's a higher percent than I would put Opal at, I'll say that. So yeah, let's run that gambit, or sorry, run that risk. A Deathrite Shaman, another PTSD card, but let's entertain a thought for a moment. It has felt mediocre and timeless even in the games where there's not show and tell Belcher stuff happening. Just okay. Alright, so what decks would it currently go in? It would go into Yawgmoth. Green Sun Zenith for Deathrite Shaman is a play pattern to keep in mind. It also has, if Deathrite Shaman is commonly played in a format, that means that there's a deck building incentive against going all in on the graveyard. So I know some people, well, I know exactly one person, been clamoring for a Soul Cauldron ban and whatnot. So there's, if Breach doesn't get banned, which it almost certainly is, not that Deathrite Shaman would be good against Breach, but hey, if Breach gets banned, the next graveyard deck that comes in. I guess the main issue with Deathrite Shaman here, ignore the last, the main issue would be Ketchamos, which means I actually think Deathrite Shaman is more closer to like 50%, maybe even 40%. Like, it's certainly among the riskiest, I think it's the riskiest card here, just because of Ketchamos, but it's a very, one reason I actually want to see it unbanned is because there's a lot of decision points with this card, and Deathrite Shaman mirrors are actually highly involved. And there's, yeah, again, a lot of decision making, which is exactly what we want from our modern games, right? We don't want you to just like, play out the cards and the game plays itself. Almost Deathrite Shaman is not a card like that. Very interesting. Yeah, let's run that risk. Bridge from Below. Now this is, you may think that this is only going to support unhealthy, just all in graveyard decks, which is kind of true. Dredge currently sees 0 play. It'd be a huge buff to Dredge. I think it could also be very interesting in some kind of fair, Bloodghast, Faithless Looting. These cards don't sound fair, right? But some kind of fair, maybe like Golgari Roots style decks. So it wouldn't be like an all-in Dredge deck. It'd be like, say, you play your Bloodghast, you play maybe your Sneaky Snackers. Those are your only creatures that return. You play some looting effects, and you just play a normal mid-range plan, and you got a few Bridge from Belows that you can discard. I think that'd be actually very interesting. And I think that may be somewhat powerful, and if that deck did exist and Dredge was not broken, or was not seeing heavy play, I think that would be a net benefit for the format. Here I've got a list of cards that are unabannable if other cards get banned. Pretty self-explanatory, Arkham's Astrolabe, but I think with Opal, Astrolabe is not unbannable. I would have said it was unbannable before Opal, but if you get rid of Opal, Astrolabe is like, yeah, it's just unbannable. We don't have Yorion anymore. It would be okay. The only negative, I've heard the most convincing counter argument for unbanning Arkham's Astrolabe is that everyone is forced to play Snow Basics as to, say, bluff that you're running the Astrolabe, which is, yeah, that's not a great effect, so I'm fine with this thing banned. Amped Raptor, if they ban some energy cards, say they ban a Johnny, maybe they even ban a Ocelot Pride, maybe they even ban Guide of Souls, then Amped Raptor is just perfectly fine. And I think it'd actually be healthy because it could benefit some of the Primal Prayers decks, which do not exist currently. I wonder why. The hint is not just Amtraptor. Dark Depths. I think Dark Depths can actually be amazing for the format if they ban the 2 easy combos with it. So that'd be Thespian Stage, Hexcatcher. Because then if you ignore those, then you have to do some weird things like, oh, play Blood Moon in your lands deck and then remove your own Blood Moon after you play Dark Depths. There's like it's an interesting puzzle to solve. And none of the ways to actually get your 2020 would be available before like turn 4. So if that's the case, then maybe a Landspeeder deck can actually come up, say a land like Elvish Reclaimer, Maverick, whatnot, and it would have this win con in its land base, which is kind of what it needs to be a deck. And it wouldn't be turboed out, and it wouldn't be broken. And well, we've got Prismatic, and we've got Solitude, we've got a ton of counterplay to it. I think it'd actually be great for the format. So yeah, ban those 2 cards, unban Dark Depths, 100%. One of my most wanted unbans. See the sign on, pre-opal, yes. Post-opal, no. Not much to say there. A Field of the Dead, if they were to significantly nerf or just, just straight up ban Amulet or ban Primeval Titan, then Field of the Dead can come off. The play patterns aren't necessarily great, but it would help support some of the slower decks which are struggling right now. It would also help support some of the aforementioned land style decks, which I think would be great for the format. I don't have too much to say about that card. I'm kind of almost neutral on it. That's it. Let me know your thoughts, and the end.